Hello, I'm Michael Voris.
And I'm Father Pablo, Catholic missionary priest. We really want you to watch every week the one true faith. Had you left that one true faith, please come home. We're waiting for you because we love you.
Hello, everyone, and welcome again to The One True Faith, the show that we say is the most disturbing hour of television because we talk about where we're going to spend eternity. And for some people, that will be good news, and sadly, for other people, it'll probably not very good news at all. Hopefully, for you sitting at home, for everybody here in the studio audience, we will all be in heaven together one day, laughing about all of the mess-ups that happen during television when you're sitting in a studio audience with a live show going on. One of the things that in the last 40 years, lots of Catholics and non-Catholics have lost any sort of real sense about what the Catholic Church teaches about virtually everything it teaches about. We're not going to go into all, why, what happened, and that's not the point. The point is the damage is done, and many Catholics don't know their faith. Most Catholics, I would venture to guess, that's just a personal opinion, I haven't taken a survey, but from the Catholics I've talked to and from the different people that you meet in airports and hotels and conventions and just you're going about your daily life, even people sitting next to you in church. The Catholic Church in some ways sort of looks like Berlin in 1945 right now, as far as people knowing stuff about the faith. Is that a severe statement? Yes. Is it a severe situation? Yes, it is. Now, at the end of the show or the end of the season, you can say, I think all that's baloney, and we will be sorry for you on that, but that's your free will. However, we hope some of you will say, I never knew that. We get phone calls from people during the season, during the show, during this show as a matter of fact, who will call and say, I didn't know this, I didn't know that, I used to be Catholic, and I never heard this before, and no one ever told me that. Well, now we are. And for whatever reason, it's unfortunate you didn't hear the truth before, but now you are hearing the truth, and it's not our truth, it's the teaching of Jesus Christ coming through the Holy Catholic Church, which is protected, inspired, and taught by the Holy Spirit. As Jesus said that after he ascended to the Father, he said, I will send you the Holy Spirit, and he will teach you all truth. That truth resides, the fullness of that truth resides in the Catholic Church. And that's what we're about here, is just helping spread that word. As all of you are indeed instructed by Jesus to spread too. You don't have to build a TV studio. You don't have to be an author. You don't have to be on a radio program. You have a life and you are around other people, I presume. Doesn't look like any of you here live in a cave and haven't seen humanity for 25 years. People sitting next to you at work, that's a soul. That's one of your brothers or one of your sisters who might be considering having an abortion, or whose husband is cheating on her, or in fact might be the husband who in fact is doing the cheating. Somebody who's fallen into some horrible vice, a habitual habit of sin. You can't just sit there and think, I'm not getting near them. It's your duty to go out and help that person and do whatever you can to help them within reason. I mean, you can't beat them over the head and drag them into the church, but you should be a shining example to them of the faith. And the Catholic faith is truly the most remarkable gift God could give anybody because it contains the fullness of truth. The fullness of truth resides in the Catholic Church. Everything you need to know to get to heaven is right here. Why? Because Jesus set it up that way. How unfair would it have been for Jesus to come to earth, tell all of his apostles, here's everything you need to know, and then as the centuries went by, let that faith kind of disappear and people not know the truth. The Holy Spirit keeps the Catholic Church alive in the fullness of the faith. So we talk about different topics every week. Today's topic is about apparitions. Ooh, apparitions. Big word. What's it mean? It means appearances. That's it. Sightings. That's all. A Protestant friend of mine once called Catholic apparitions sort of like religious UFOs. I guess that's perhaps one way of looking at it. But, apparitions have sort of taken a bad rap recently. It's really hard just to go through American media, American culture in just a week and not see some bizarro version of an apparition. There's the Blessed Mother appearing in some toast. There's the Holy Spirit stuck on the side of a subway car running across the L in Chicago. Or, I know I opened up my peanut butter and there was Jesus right there in the peanut butter. Well, while those sort of fall under the broad category of an apparition, they're actually false apparitions. However, the Catholic Church and salvation history is littered through with apparitions. Now, I can imagine that some of our non-Catholic and even some Catholics are sitting around saying, oh, well, here we go. Oh, these apparitions. Here's those crazy Catholics at it again. Blessed Virgin Mary popping in and out of here and there. Saint this, saint that. Da, da. Well, let me tell you, this isn't just a Catholic thing. Go back to the book of Genesis. Go back to the book of Genesis. God walked with Adam in the cool of the evening. That's an apparition. Those three strangers that came to see Abraham and Sarah, or Abram and Sarah, and said, you're going to have a child when we come back here next year. That was an apparition. The burning bush with Moses, that's an apparition. Jesus appearing all of those times after the resurrection, those are apparitions. This isn't something that just the Catholic Church just made up one day and said, hey, let's get them all to give us money on these kind of weird little stories. This has been going on since the beginning of time. That God manifests himself to his people in a tangible, physical way that the human mind can perceive. Now, they are very rare exceptions. I will grant you that. But just because they're rare doesn't mean they don't exist. If they didn't exist, we wouldn't call them rare. We'd call them non-existent. But since they do occur, but only relatively speaking, we call them rare. But they do exist, and they do occur. In 1984, when the current Pope, Pope Benedict XVI, was just Cardinal Ratzinger, he was just a cardinal, he was struck by the explosion in the reported apparitions that were going on around the world, most of them having to do with the Blessed Mother. They just skyrocketed since about 1960. Just this explosion of them. If you go onto a number of websites, you'll be bowled over by there's dozens and dozens and dozens of them. Now, time out, that doesn't mean they're all real. We're talking about the reportings of apparitions. Now, there were no reportings on that scale of apparitions much before 1960, 1950. There's always been a steady stream throughout all of Catholic history of reported sightings of the Blessed Mother and saints and that sort of thing. But there seems to have been in the last 40 years or so, 50 years, this explosion of the number of them. But before we start talking about specific apparitions, let's do a couple of things here. We're going to talk about some general information. Think, first of all, go back to the Bible and think about Simeon. When Joseph and Mary brought Jesus into the temple on the 8th day for the presentation, as was prescribed by Jewish law, since he was the firstborn son, Simeon had an apparition before that. God had told him, you will not die until you see the Messiah. Now, let's just take that thought, put it over here. We're going to come back to it at the end after we've talked about apparitions. But just remember that. That's the case of we don't know anything else that God said to him except that. But he had an apparition. And before we talk about that, I also want to make a point here that because this is a show that deals with specific, authentic Catholic Church teaching, we are not going to deal with apparitions that have not been approved by the Church. That isn't to say that they're not real. They may be real, they may not be real, but we're not going to talk about those because we don't want to put a grab bag together and confuse people. There are apparitions that have been authenticated by the Catholic Church for a number of reasons, and those are the ones we're going to be talking about. That is not to do a disservice to any other apparitions that have occurred in the past or are currently ongoing. The Church just hasn't made a pronouncement about them, so we're not going to discuss them in this forum. That's not a fair discussion to have. Apparitions have a number of common themes. First of all, the visionaries, the people who see them, usually don't like the publicity attached to them, to themselves or to the apparitions. They didn't ask for them. they severely dislike that attention. The apparition, the visionaries are usually young, pretty normal, poorly educated to just mildly educated. There's nothing really outstanding about them in their lives, and that includes their life of holiness. Sometimes you watch some of these movies about different saints and everything, and it's like, here's the playground, and then all of a sudden, there's Saint Jimmy, and Saint Jimmy's walking around with a glow, and he picks up the ball and there's blood on it from his stigmata, and that's just not what the case was with the people before the visions. After the visions, they usually tend to very remarkably holy lives, but before that, not so much. They're not unholy, they're just not remarkable in any particular way. You wouldn't pick them out of a crowd as being like, "Ooh, I bet you he has visions." The apparitions also tend to occur in places that are very remote or isolated. And they also seem to run a common theme when religious beliefs are under attack. The apparitions sort of come because, the faith needs reinforcement. I mean, all of us have this experience, don't we? We believe. We all believe, don't we? We believe in God, we believe in heaven, we believe in Jesus. But every now and then it's just kind of like, oh, God, do we really, just give me a little pep, Jesus. Pick me up a little bit here. This is a little wearing. Life's a bit of a drudgery right now. Pick me up. The faith needs reinforcement. God knows that. God knows that. And who better to get reinforcement from than your mom, right? Mom's always there with a little, go on, you'll do a good job, come on. That's what a mom is. That's not all a mom is, but that's one of the things moms do. That's why kids usually go to mom and say, "Hey, Mom, can I do this year?" Mom's usually the first one that gets asked for the favor, right? Yeah, well, in most cases. These visions are also never expected. No one ever sits around and says, "Well, I'm expecting about right now that I should be having a vision from the Virgin Mary for the first time. I've lived a pretty holy life at the tender age of 12, and I seem to glow when I'm sitting in history class with all my other classmates. I should be due for a vision." Nope. Most of these visions, when they happen, people are going about their daily lives. Just, they're tending the cows, they're watering the sheep, milking the cows, feeding the sheep, just minding their own business, and all of a sudden, a vision begins. There's some sort of introduction that grabs their mind, grabs their attention, and they turn to it, and the vision begins. They were never expecting it. They're ordinary people in their ordinary lives, and these are the hallmarks of the visionaries. Generally, when the Blessed Virgin Mary comes to them, they usually get warned that their lives on earth will probably not be very happy. Their lives on earth will probably not be very happy. And I want to take one moment to do a sidebar and say, if you're sitting at home and you're watching this and you are thinking, "Oh, here's another preacher guy who's going to tell me how to fatten my 401k, and if I believe in Jesus, I'm going to lead a nice, rich, happy life," well, turn the channel. Don't turn the channel, I'm just joking. That is not what Jesus said. That is not what Jesus says. That is not what any of the apparition visionaries say is told to them either. In this life, Jesus said, "If you love me, you will pick up your cross and follow me daily." If somebody's giving you some kind of financial Christianity where you're getting some sort of security in your retirement, or that's the promise, you're getting lied to and you're getting suckered in. You're getting an American capitalist theology, and that is not what the purpose of religion is. So if you're watching that, and if you're channel surfing and you happen to have stopped right here on this channel, hold up, because you're going to hear something very different than you hear on any other channel. The explicit consistency of the visionaries' stories, months, weeks, years after, remain consistent. The story, they never contradict themselves. Years after the fact, they could tell you exactly what happened in astonishing detail. Astonishing detail. The messages given in the visions all pretty much have the same general theme, and that message is a call to conversion. Change your life. Get rid of sin in your life. Change your life. Become holy. That's the message of the visions. That is always the message given in them. And the apparitions are usually accompanied or immediately followed by these extraordinary events, proof that the person isn't a nut, or isn't a liar, or isn't just someone who's sincere but delusional. Natural occurrences, Eucharistic miracles where the sacred host turns into flesh and blood. They usually have some sort of accompanying sign so the people who are standing there who cannot see the vision know that the vision has a miraculous stamp on it that believe what you're being told here. How do we assess if an apparition is true or not? Well, first of all, when someone comes up and says, I just saw St. Francis. He just appeared to me in my back garden. Well, you immediately fall into the category of questionable. So what do? What does the church do? The Catholic Church starts an investigation. And you go through this whole, every apparition starts at that level. You question it. You never just accept it. Even St. Paul says, test the spirits. So you always immediately question. And you should remain on that questioning level. Do not immediately fall into, this is a, because we're human, we're fallen, we have psychologies of our own individually, and sometimes a message that is not from heaven gets into our head and makes sense to us because that's the way we want things to be. Now, it doesn't mean anybody's committing a sin. It doesn't mean anything except that just be careful. If somebody's telling you they're having visions and having communications from God, you don't discount them right away, but you don't just jump on the bandwagon and say, they're holy. You stop and you think and you say, let's test the spirits here. That's what the Catholic Church does. Then, once they've tested, the next thing they do is they determine one of three things. This is false. This apparition is false. The person is sincere, but for whatever reason, they're deluded. The next level of apparition is, this is a fraud. This is fraudulent. The person is saying all of this because they want the attention, they want money, they need publicity. Whatever it is, it's fraudulent. And the last one is, it's authentic. That this person was given a singular grace to be able to behold Jesus or the Blessed Virgin Mary or another saint or an angel for some express reason. And that reason is always to draw them and the people who will come into contact with them closer to the faith. That's the only thing God cares about, is about us getting to heaven. So, how does the church judge if something is an authentic apparition? Well, the first thing it does is it says, is there some sort of supernatural intervention here? There's a thorough evaluation. The bishop looks at the case. The local bishop looks at the case and says, there's enough here that this merits being able to have the faithful come and practice devotions. I'm not saying it's real. I'm saying there's nothing here that contradicts the faith, and everything I see falling out of this seems to indicate a spiritual good. So I will sort of pass it on to the next level. The next level is that there's a lengthy period involved where people are allowed to come and express a devotion to whatever the apparition or the message of the apparition is. If it reaches that far, and at the end of a certain amount of time, depending on what the circumstances are, the time varies, at the end of that, then it gets to Rome. And if the Pope is looking at this and says, I am disposed to look upon this apparition or these events favorably, that's pretty much your Supreme Court right there. You pretty much get it. At that point, it generally passes on to the liturgical calendar and actually has a feast day associated with it. But these are very, very high bars. Out of the thousands and tens of thousands of calls for apparitions, we don't have that many that have actually reached that kind of level. Again, rare but real. Now, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about specific apparitions, kind of the Hall of Fame of Catholic visions and visionaries when we come right back. We'll be right back right after this. Welcome back to The One True Faith. We're talking about apparitions, and we're about to talk about some very famous ones and not so famous ones in Catholic history, Catholic Church history. Now, before we say this, just want to say we're on TV here. Television is not an exhaustive research tool. We're going to skim over some of the more notable and a few of the less notable apparitions, church-approved apparitions in church history. But by no means is this an exhaustive list, nor the ones that we actually talk about are you going to get all the details on it. If you want to get details, go to the website that you see on the screen right now, catholictelevision.org, and we have links to much more detail about all of these apparitions and then even ones we're not speaking about on the show today. So again, it's television. We got to get out in a certain amount of time. You can't talk endlessly, although some people accuse me of that. And so we'll move along here, but just remember, go to catholictelevision.org if you want to find out a lot more details. So let's talk about apparitions. We're going to talk specifically about the apparitions of our Blessed Mother, of Our Lady. Does anybody know when the first apparition was of Our Lady?
Was it 1514?
Very close. You're about 1,500 years late, but it's close. I know the one you're talking about, though. We'll get to that in a little second. But no, the very first apparition of Our Lady happened way back in the first half of the first century, back in around the year 40 or 41. And who did it happen to? It happened to St. James the Apostle. After Jesus ascended to heaven and St. James and the other apostles were preaching in the region around Jerusalem and Israel and Judah, James made his way through the Roman Empire to the northeast corner of Spain, an area called Saragossa, and he was there, and he got all depressed and was all, oh gosh, no matter where I preach, people aren't listening to him, and he kind of slumped down, and he's like, well, this isn't very, I don't know, I'm not sure what I'm doing wrong here. Maybe I need to hire a PR agency or something. This isn't happening. And Our Lady appeared to him and gave him a statue of herself and a pillar of wood and said, James, I want you to build a chapel here, a church here, a place of worship here. Well, James did that. It took him about a year, and about a year later he did it. He goes back to Jerusalem and is martyred. He's the first martyr among the apostles, is martyred by Herod Agrippa, the king of Judea at the time. James's disciples bring his body back to Spain and bury him there at that place in Saragossa. And the queen, the local ruler of the region, saw all of a sudden this sort of array of miracles being performed by James's disciples. She converts to Catholicism, and the region becomes intensely Catholic. Intensely Catholic. About 8 centuries later, a farmer is standing out in the field, and he looks up in the sky one evening time, and he sees this very weird arrangement of stars. And that field, because of that weird arrangement of stars, is where they decide to build a cathedral, and that cathedral is built to St. James. And if you understand Spanish, if I were to say, would you please translate starry field, you would probably say Compostela. And that cathedral, that basilica that's there in Saragossa, Spain, is the Basilica of St. James Compostela, and that's where it came from. It began from a first century Marian apparition. The next major one that happened that's church approved is in the middle of the 4th century. The persecutions had just ended. The Roman Empire just ended. Christianity was now legal about 20, 30 years after Constantine, and Christianity was legal. 2 very wealthy Romans, a man by the name of John and his wife, both had the same dream the same night. And it was to build a church on one of Rome's 7 hills. So they're both talking about this over Roman breakfast, probably of prosciutto and fatty meats and cheeses. And they're saying, hey, do you imagine the dream? I had the dream too. Well, I had the same dream. Let's go to the Pope. So they go off to the Pope. They tell the Pope, hey, we had this dream. And in this dream, Mary told us to build this church on this hill in Rome. And the Pope says, you're kidding. That's the same dream I had. So off they go on August 5th. To go to one of the hills, 7 hills of Rome. Now, if you've ever been in Rome in the middle of August, you will know that what you're about to hear would be impossible if it were not for a miracle. It will not snow in Rome the first week of August. Ever, unless it's the Ice Age. It will not snow. Romans leave Rome during August. It's so hot, the Pope leaves town. Nobody stays in Rome. If you want to go visit Rome and you don't have much money, August is the month to do it. The hotels are 1/3, the food's dirt cheap if you can find any restaurants that are still open. They go to this hill, and there, outlined in snow, in a fresh snowfall, is the entire outline of this gigantic church, which was built and dedicated on August 5th, the day they all had this vision in their dreams. And that church is now the Basilica of St. Mary Major. It's a beautiful story. How even in our dreams that heaven looks after us, conveys messages to us. The next one, fast forward about 700-800 years to the Angel Isle, England, the town of Walsingham. And there's a noble English woman there who the Blessed Mother appears to and shows her in the vision, shows her the house that the angel Gabriel came to her with the announcement that she was to be the Mother of God in Nazareth, the holy house in Nazareth. Not the holy house where the family lived, but where Mary was when the angel Gabriel came to her. And Mary instructs the noble lady, build a duplicate of this house here and tell anybody who's sorrowful and having problems, come to this house and pray in this house, and I will give you comfort and strength and succor, and I will give you what a mother would always give you. And so she builds this house. And for about 500 years, this house in Walsingham, England, is almost one of the major pilgrim shrines of all of Europe, of all of the Middle Ages. Thousands and thousands of people from the continent and England come to this house. Kings visit this house. As a matter of fact, which surprised many people, the last king to visit the house was Henry VIII. Henry VIII came to this house. Then, of course, he left the house. He met Anne Boleyn. He wanted a divorce. He had an affair. He got all mad at the Pope, and the Pope wouldn't say, yeah, your adultery is fine. He had the bishops of England name him the head of the church in England, and then he set on this massive destruction campaign and had many Catholic shrines and pilgrim centers destroyed in England. This house was one of them. In the 1920s, an Anglican priest, of all people, actually rebuilt the house. He rebuilt the house based on different drawings and news of the time and that sort of thing. But there was, right beside the house, the Nazareth house, the Annunciation house, there was a little house called the Slipper Chapel. And people during the Middle Ages who had gone there would take their shoes off and leave them in there before they would walk into the actual Annunciation house. For some reason, that little chapel never got destroyed. That's the original chapel. So they built it right there at the same place on the same grounds, and it's back again, and it's actually becoming another big tourist tourist center for pilgrims. In France, in the 13th century, beginning of the 13th century, Dominic Guzman, who was in the order of preachers, the Dominicans, was preaching against a heresy in southern France called the Albigensians. We don't need to get into what the heresy was, but it was a bad thing. And he was preaching against it, and Our Lady appeared to him in an apparition and held out to him a rosary and said, here, you need to say this every day, and it will help in your struggle against the heresy. Now, there are a number of sort of conflicting historical data that says, well, it didn't exactly happen like that. But nobody challenges the fact of whether Dominic had an apparition from the Blessed Virgin. It's just exactly what the details were. But there were sort of earlier versions in different regions of Europe of different types of rosaries. But this sort of became the rosary back from the year 1208. There was a priest by the name of St. Simon Stock, or Simon Stock at the time. He was a saint after he died. But he joined the Carmelites. He was an English fellow. He joined the Carmelites. He went over to the Middle East, Jerusalem, during one of the Crusades. He came back. He was so impressed by what he saw over there with the Our Lady of Mount Carmel's shrine that he joined the Carmelites. He came back to England, and during an apparition from Our Lady, she presented to him what the Catholic Church calls the brown scapular. I actually have one on. The brown scapular, if I can get it, the brown scapular is something that I guess I can't get it. The brown scapular is something that the Blessed Virgin gave to Simon and said, this is, all it is just two little pieces of wool connected by a string. They call it a scapular because when you put it on, it rests on your scapular bones. And she said, anybody who wears this devotedly and faithfully will not suffer eternal fire, will not go to hell. Promise from Our Lady for the brown scapular. If you don't have a brown scapular, get one. If you don't have a brown scapular, get one. If you want to know more about what a brown scapular is, catholictelevision.org, right there. Call us up, call us, get on the website. We'll be more than happy to tell you about it. A fantastic story that isn't actually an apparition in the strict sense of an apparition is the Black Madonna of Czestochowa. This is one of the most fascinating stories of holiness given to us, gifts given to us in the tangible world by heaven. The Black Madonna of Czestochowa resides right now in a church in Czestochowa, Poland. It's been there since the mid-14th century, late 14th century. But its history before that, for the 1400 years, is that when St. Luke was alive on earth, Luke was alive on earth and was talking to Jesus' mother, to Mary, he was asking her, as you would imagine would be a pretty normal conversation, he was saying, so Mary, tell me about Jesus. Tell me about before he was preaching. What did you guys... And Mary started recounting to Luke the story about the Annunciation, the story about the shepherds and the wise men and the infancy. And that's why all of that is in Luke's gospel, because he got that right from the mouth of Mary. Well, while she was telling him that story, he was actually painting this image of Mary with Jesus on a big piece of wood. And the story goes on to tell us that that piece of wood that he was actually painting on was one of the tables that Jesus had actually built when he was learning to be a carpenter. Bet you didn't know that, did you? Nope, you didn't. Look at all those. No, I never heard that before. See, I told you, you never hear that before. That table was discovered, that painting, we're going to call it a painting, but understand it's not on a canvas, it's on a wooden table without the legs. That was discovered by St. Helena, Constantine's mother, and given to Constantine. And in Constantinople, well, he was being attacked by some massive force. He took the painting and dangled it over the sides of the walls of Constantinople, and the army that was attacking him got routed by his forces. And they were out, there was a massive, there's like no way he should ever have won this battle. But with the Madonna painting, which was not called Czestochowa right then, but with this Madonna painting of St. Luke's over his shoulder hanging on the walls of Constantinople, they won the battle. It stays in Constantinople for a while. It gets shifted over to Charlemagne in France in 800. He holds on to it for a while. He gives it to a king of Ruthenia, which is in northwestern, I believe, Hungary. It preserves this king and a number of other kings and princes who always turn to this Madonna image time and time again when the faith is about to be extinguished in some sort of battle by some sort of imposing army. In the 1300s, Ladislaus, who was a prince of Poland, had a dream to go ask the Hungarians, the Ruthenians, for the image, and he goes, he gets the image, they give it to him, he puts it in Jasna, and when he puts it in Jasna, which is Polish for Mount of Light, he puts it in Jasna, again, military battles, improbable military victories happen as a result of people praying to the image, not because the image has the power, so let's stop. The image doesn't have the power, it's the prayers that you're not praying to the piece of wood and the paint on it, you're praying to what it represents. Just like when you see somebody and you feel homesick or lonely and you reach into your wallet and you pull out a picture, a snapshot of somebody you love, you're not praying to the Polaroid or talking to the Polaroid, you're talking to the person using that as a reminder. Same thing here, that's all it is. Again, they're successful with a number of military battles. They're getting attacked one day. The prince takes this to Czestochowa, and it remains in Czestochowa to this day for the last roughly 600 years or so, 650 years. They call it the Black Madonna because it has had so many votive candles and so many prayers offered to it that all the soot from all of those centuries has just really darkened the image of it, and so they call it the Black Madonna of Czestochowa. The funny thing is that when the communists finally we'll call them what they are, when the commies, the liberal pinko commies, finally left Poland, thank you John Paul and Blessed Mother, the pilgrimages to the shrine at Czestochowa just skyrocketed. It was one of the places that John Paul went to when he was in Poland because of the great, incredible importance that held to the Polish national identity. It had defended Poland, the image of the Madonna. As a matter of fact, the Prince of Poland, in the 1300s declared Mary the Mother of God, the protector of the people of Poland. So, and look what a beautiful reward she gave them. She gave them John Paul, and then they gave us John Paul. A beautiful blessing from the Blessed Mother. And speaking of that, to your point earlier, there is yet another national, wrapped up in the identity. In 1531, a poor peasant Indian in central Mexico by the name of Juan Diego is just sort of wandering about doing his own business, minding his own business, and all of a sudden this beautiful woman, native Indian woman, appears to him and says, I'm the mother of all nations. I want you to go and I want a chapel built here. I want a church built here. Go to the bishop and tell him that. So he's like, wow, this is beautiful, beautiful vision. She's got this glow of light around her, and off he runs to the bishop all excited. He gets into the bishop's office, and anyway, the enthusiasm quickly is sapped, which I guess it would be down at the chancery. And he's sitting there. He's sitting there for hours waiting for the bishop to come out. And finally the bishop comes out and goes, that's a very nice story. Okay, well, I'll think about it. Thank you very much. Go on your way. Well, Juan Diego's so kind of bummed out by this, and he's like, oh, well, boy, talk about failing. I mean, I thought I did everything she told me to do. It didn't work. He tries to take a back way home, sort of going around this hill. And who does he bump into? There's Mary standing there again saying, I want you to go back and tell him again, so, go on back. And so he goes back the next day, and the bishop says, I want a sign. Everybody, they kept him waiting for hours again. I want a sign. You need to give me a sign. So he comes forward, and he goes back. This time, though, when Our Lady asked him to come back, he didn't the next day because his uncle was very, very sick, and he stayed with his uncle that whole next day. The following day, he scurries off to get a priest because his uncle's near death. He has to go right by the hill again, and who does he see? There's Mary standing there, and he's like, oh, beautiful lady, I've got to get my uncle's sick. I have to get a priest. She goes, you don't have to get a priest. Your uncle's all cured. He's all healed. And he goes, well, the bishop wants a sign. She goes, see all those roses over there? Go cut those roses over. He brings the roses over. Mary places them into his tilma, which is a poncho, essentially a poncho made of cactus fiber, and says, now wrap it up like that. Now go to the bishop and do not show anybody anything before you show the bishop. And he gets into the bishop and he says, here's your sign. Now the roses would have been somewhat remarkable. It was not the season for roses. These were big, beautiful, blooming things. So, Juan Diego, thinking the roses are the big deal, opens his tilma, his poncho, and all these roses drop to the floor. And he's thinking, yeah, beautiful roses. Meanwhile, the bishop and a couple of other aides are standing there next to him. And they're just, oh my God, and they drop to their knees. And Juan Diego immediately isn't aware that what they're looking at actually is this image that has appeared on his tilma of this woman, this beautiful image of the woman. Now, when she sent him back with the tilma, with the sign, she said, I want you to call me Santa Maria de Guadalupe. Guadalupe is probably a Spanish mispronunciation of the native Indian dialect, which I'm sure I'm going to mess this up, but Coatalope, or something very close to that. Forgive me if you are a native Indian central Mexico and I messed that up, but sounds close to Guadalupe, but Coatalope. What that means is one who treads on snakes. Didn't know that. See, there's an audience of Catholics, and you didn't know something. Every show I try to find something you might not know. And that tilma is made of cactus fiber. I mean, they don't, talk about last season's fashions. They're not supposed to last very long. It's, like wearing a paper bag. It's not going to last very long. And yet it has survived for 500 years. It has survived fires and floods. It has survived a bomb explosion. Some commie got into the church and put a bomb on the altar, a big, huge explosive bomb in the 1920s that blew up this marble altar, but and the bomb was right in front of the image. They have it enclosed in hanging in a case that you can see. And it blew up the altar, blew it to smithereens, blew the altar rail off, but the image itself, the tilma, and a big iron cross standing next to it were absolutely untouched. They've done all sorts of examinations on that tilma, and they've done x-rays on it. There's no sketch marks on it. Even Da Vinci, Leonardo and Michelangelo, all these people drew an image many times over before they actually got to the final image, and that's what they started doing their painting on. None of them just picked up a paintbrush and started blah, 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 blah on the canvas. They were drawing, they drew, sort of penciled in an image first, and then from that they started doing their painting. There are no such marks like that on the tilma. They've x-rayed it, they've examined it, they've looked into, through the process of an electron microscope, or a very detailed microscope, they have looked, and in the image of the eyes of the Blessed Virgin in the tilma, on the tilma, is the reflection of the bishop, and I don't remember if it was 2 or 3 of his aides, 2, standing there next to him in the reflection of the eyes. You can't see it with your naked eye. And that's a remarkable story. That's a remarkable story. That tilma, which is now housed in the Cathedral of Guadalupe in Mexico City, is so closely bound up with the identity, the Mexican identity, that it is just as important to the Mexicans as the Black Madonna of Czestochowa is to the Polish nation. And it's a beautiful story, and it's something, don't ever say anything about the Virgin of Guadalupe to a Mexican, not if you want to have your head left on its neck. Another example of something that is to a people is Our Lady of Lavang in Vietnam. In 1798, there was in the early 1700s, mid-1700s, in these couple of generations of these warring parties and different factions trying to get control of Vietnam, modern-day Vietnam. And finally, these different rebel camps and factions finally settled, and the one that sort of won the battle was this very anti-Catholic group. And they started persecuting Catholics all over Vietnam. Well, many Catholics went deep into the jungles to hide and sort of set up little camps there, kind of like when you see in the Chuck Norris Vietnam movies. Well, not exactly. But they set up this camp in the forest. The big deep forest they went into was the Lavang Forest. And they stayed in there, and you're living in this jungle. You're getting attacked by animals. You're getting attacked by horrible beasts and starvation and all kinds of medical maladies. But they used to pray the rosary very faithfully every day. Everyone in the group got together and prayed the rosary. One day, while they were praying the rosary, our Blessed Mother appeared as the Madonna, holding the infant Jesus with 2 angels, and said, first of all, for all of those of you who are sick, take the leaves off the plants that are around you and boil them, drink the liquid, and you'll be cured. And they were. And for about the next 100 years, while these persecutions were going on in central Vietnam, the Catholics stayed in this great big huge jungle, and while they stayed there, Our Lady continued to appear to them on an irregular basis over the next century. And when the persecutions finally ended, they built a church there. Then they turned into this beautiful basilica. The basilica, unfortunately, was destroyed during the Vietnam War. But in 1978, when John Paul was canonizing the 117 Vietnamese martyrs, he said we should rebuild that basilica in honor of the Blessed Virgin for what she did for the people of Vietnam. History is loaded with them. We're running out of time to talk about them, but there are so many apparitions of Our Lady. Fatima, she came with her very dire warnings about the condition of mankind. Nikita in Japan in 1973 or 76, I believe it was. She came to Bernadette Soubirous in Lourdes in France, still the most popular shrine in the world. Millions of people come there every day. She appears to this poor peasant girl and does 2 things. One, she causes a spring to be brought forth that has cured thousands of people in the meantime, in the couple hundred years since then. But even more to the point, she reaffirmed, because 4 years before that apparition, the Pope and the Church had declared the dogma of the Immaculate Conception, which is a Catholic teaching, the Catholic dogma that says that through a singular act of grace, God preserved Our Lady from any stain of original sin from the first moment of her conception, because He did this for her because she was to be the Mother of God. 4 years later, Our Lady appears to this young peasant girl, Bernadette, causes this miraculous spring to come forth, and at the end of all of these visits, Bernadette says to her, "What's your name?" And she says, "I am the Immaculate Conception." So heaven reaches into our lives, and these apparitions are beautiful gifts from Almighty God. And they're beautiful gifts given to the Catholic faithful in the Catholic Church. You are not required to believe them, but I guess if you were sort of a betting guy and people in miracles and people are getting up from the dead and walking away, step into the water at Lourdes and they have cancer and they walk out and they're fine, I think at some point you're going to say, maybe I should pay attention to that. When we come back, we're going to take some questions from the studio audience about apparitions, about Mary, about Catholic teaching on apparitions. So be right back. Stay with us. Well, and welcome back to the One True Faith. We're talking today about apparitions in the Catholic Church, specifically Marian apparitions in the Catholic Church. We have a number of questions from our studio audience. So, ma'am, step up to the microphone here. Tell us your name and where you're from and what's your question.
My name's Ophelia, and we're from Detroit. And my question is like in 3 sections, kind of.
Sure.
So it was, what was the miracle of the Virgin of Fatima? What year did it occur? And if there were 3 children, right?
That's right. It was Fatima, Portugal in 1917. On May 13th, Our Lady appeared and to the 3 children and had a number of messages for them about sinners repenting, turning back to God. It was just towards the last year or so of World War I, and she said, made the prediction, made the prophecy that the war would soon be over and the soldiers would come home. But if men did not repent and lead better lives, another more terrible war would break out. And of course, that was, World War I was called the war to end all wars because at the end of it, 11 million people had died. And that was just, there'd never been this kind of death and destruction on that level. World War II, when it was over, almost 60 million people died in World War II in a war that was just about the same length. So World War I was just, a walk in the park compared to World War II. But Our Lady asked the children, Lucy, Jacinto, and Francesco, to come back to the Cova, which is where it was outside of the town of Fatima, to come back there every day on the 13th for 6 months. And she had a number of messages about essentially people living much holier lives. And and this is very short again because we're doing TV. Fatima's 7 shows in itself, but on the 13th of October, she told the children that on the 13th of October, the last day she would appear to them at the Cova, that she would perform a miracle so that everybody who was there would believe. Well, the day before, on the 12th, it was just peppering down rain. There's pictures in all the current newspapers of the time of this just ocean of black umbrellas and the rain just pouring down. It rained all day the next day, all night long, all into the next morning. It was still raining when Our Lady appeared. And to sort of put that rubber stamp from heaven on the messages of Fatima, all of a sudden the sun did what's described by all the witnesses there as this dance in the sky. The sun came out of its orbit and started dancing around with these huge, brilliant colors. And at first everyone was like, oh, and then it looked like it was coming down, and they thought it was the end of the world. And they started running, or as you might imagine, running around, screaming, carrying on, and this happened for a while. And then the sun returned to its orbit in the sky, and all of everybody there who had been just drenched to the bone, the ground was bone dry. It was all dust. Everybody's clothes were dry as a bone. Now you can say that 30 or 40,000 people had a massive hallucination, but you know what? Hallucinations don't dry clothes. And today that's one of the most revered pilgrimage sites in all of the Catholic Church. And the message was, amend your life, because God is very upset with the amount of sin. Unfortunately, almost 100 years later, I think things have gotten worse. So, but thank you for your question. Be right back, right after the break. So how should we read these visions? We said earlier, remember Simeon and what he did. Simeon didn't sit around and try to decode God. He didn't try to sit there and say, oh, well, wait a second, the vision said this and the apparition said the other. He simply trusted. He simply trusted. And in answer to one of the earlier questions, what does God want from us? What the Blessed Mother said as their last recorded lines in Scriptures, do whatever He tells you. And what does God tell you to do? He tells you to fight evil, to live the faith, to do what you need to do what you need to do to be faithful and get to heaven. and realize that we are in a battle. We are in a spiritual battle. That's why these apparitions happen, to reinforce the faith, to make us stronger in our faith so that we can fight evil and we can get to heaven. That's the entire reason these apparitions happen. If somebody's making money off them or seems a bit like out of their mind or something, well, maybe you should listen to that. But we are engaged in a spiritual war, immortal combat, and we need to realize that. That's how the very first Christians saw the world, and they lived it like that. We have to get back to that type of mindset, to be faithful to the gospel, even to the point of death. So pick up that sword, and if you have to die for the faith, you die for the faith. God bless you next week. We'll see you on the One True Faith.